Hello. I put up here the Bergensklinikkene website address where you can pick up any copies of the reports, Bergensklinikkene reports. That's my email if you need anything more detailed. There's an article about the project in English that's just been published in a journal called Drug Education, Prevention and Policy, if anybody wants that. And it's translated into Norwegian, actually, out of the English, in NAT, Nordisk Alcohol, is it NAD? Well, I don't know the name of it. Anyone help me? Nordisk Alcohol and Drugs. Anyway, it's a Scandinavian journal on drugs. And there's an article that's coming out in the next edition. Okay. Forgetting Verva, early warning. I don't know if you were warned I was going to present in English, I realise, so I hope it's okay. It's working all right. Sorry if it's a shock. You've only got one more session with me and then you can relax again, okay? I'll try and keep it fairly short. Completely different. So if I could change my clothes quickly. We're not talking about trends, we're talking about peer education. And I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking a little bit about what peer education is as a method. And again, I'm going to be a little bit more practical at the end and share a project that we've developed in Bergen that works with this method, and a little bit how that went and what we've done and some evaluation results which might be interesting if you're interested in developing a model yourself. So just to be clear on the English-Norwegian, you will mainly use til formidling, and I will be saying peer education, okay, and that's an equivalent. Now actually it's different. A peer isn't necessarily a young person, so we could have a big discussion on that one, but we'll look a little bit more. A definition of peer education, at least, using people from of the same age or the same background to convey educational messages to a particular target group. Peer educators work by endorsing, supporting healthy norms, beliefs and behaviours within their own peer group or community, and challenging those that are unhealthy. That's a very official definition from UNDCP, the United Nations. There's lots of different definitions as to what this peer education thing is. It's very popular, people are very interested in it. I've got lots of different views. I'm not going to read them all, but the process of sharing information among members of a particular community to achieve positive health outcomes. I quite like the simpler ones at the bottom. Here, the term peer education is used to describe education of young people by other young people. That's quite a common use. And actually that it's actually a fancy term for something that's very normal, very everyday, that individuals are communicating with each other. So different thoughts as to what peer education is or might be. And these educators, these peer educators. Here again, MacDonald, a peer educator, a messenger, who is similar to the target group in terms of characteristics such as age, gender, cultural background, has similar experiences and has, and this is important, enough social standing or status in the group to have an influence. Now, there's lots of sort of discussion about peer education, and one of them is just this difference or distinction between a true peer and a near peer. Very simply, a true peer is somebody who is similar, is an actual member of the same community, is the same age as those that are being educated. And near peer, which is often more common, is that somebody who's close, perhaps from the same group, but a bit older, is used in terms of education, or is involved in the education. So similar, but maybe a bit older, a bit more experienced, what have you. Again, what's meant by peer group, or the community, that can be defined very narrowly in terms of a group of people, perhaps young people of a certain age, or it can be very broad. It can mean young people in general. So it's used in different ways. And again, when we talk about peer education, the setting is quite interesting and quite important, because peer education tends to be thought of as either a school peer education intervention, or a community peer education project or intervention. In school, peer educators are not always, but often, slightly more able students that are involved in the actual educating. In the community projects, it's often more at risk or vulnerable, marginal young people that are involved as peer educators. So, peer education, what's the method, how's the information passed on? Sometimes it's formal, a formal programme of education. Sometimes it's much more relaxed, it's much more informal, more of an influencing. So the peer teaching model is what it sounds like. That's where the peer educators, often young people, act a little bit like teachers. They have a certain amount of power. It's often a bit like a classroom type technique. The peer influence model tends to be describing interventions that, for example, where young people give out leaflets, have conversations with other young people, often more community type projects. Another example would be drama, where young people go engage in putting on a play or a piece of drama that discusses a health promotion issue, discusses perhaps HIV, sexual health, drug use issues. Peer participation model, again, a bit linked to the influence, but that's where the educators are very involved in developing the education intervention. An example there might be something like HIV and AIDS, for example, where experienced drug users actually go out and work with the people that they know, their peer group, other drug users, and talk about safer injecting. Or they maybe work with other drug users about overdose and how to cope in an overdose situation. So there's engaged, and that they help develop those interventions. Just to give you a sense of how popular, how big a thing peer education is, I did a while ago actually a search on Google using the term peer education, and there's over 8 million references came up, and that's just English language. So peer education it's not particularly new, and it's not particularly small. It's very popular. Lots been written. There are lots of projects and programmes. And it's also rather an old technique. This chappie, who some of you may recognise, Aristotle, he's often considered to be one of the founders of peer education. So it's not something that's very, as I say, not very new, though we may be forgiven for the way it's written about and talked about, that it's rather a new trendy thing. It's not. He, back in the time of the Greeks, he used students that he worked with as archons, where they helped other students understand the philosophy lesson. So it was using certain students that were picked out to share messages with other students. There's also the educationalist Joseph Lancaster is also linked to the history of peer education as a method. In the 18th century, his monitorial system, which I believe also spread out of the UK and was into Denmark and Norway at that time, where schools were developed using disadvantaged young people, and they taught reading and writing and basic maths to others. It was a very cheap system, which is one of the things that's often said now about peer education. An advantage is it's rather a cheap way of educating. Moving on a bit to the last century, there was a bit of a kind of renewal of interest in the method in the 1950s internationally. But perhaps the biggest flowering was in response to HIV and AIDS, where a lot of projects were developed. For example, working with gay men, empowering other gay men in terms of safer sex. So that's where I say it's not always till it's peer. It means you're part of the same community, though very often with young people, not always. And also in terms of drug users, working to, as I said, in terms of safer injecting, sharing information with other drug users. As we know, it's also moved more to be used in drug prevention, smoking cessation, etc. Very briefly, there's a fairly good theoretical basis to much of the peer educational literature and the models linked to behavioural psychology very often. Social learning theory, which gives us very simply put, the role modelling idea that's often used in peer education. Diffusion of innovation theory, again simplistically, but the idea that there can be opinion leaders in a particular community that can be used to influence others. Social identity theory, again, in-groups and out-groups, the idea that members of the same in-group may have a greater influence, i.e. other young people, than somebody who's out of the group, which could be adults, so that there may be a stronger influence. And peer education draws on elements of many of these theories. At the end, the participatory education, the idea here is the empowerment model that peer education also draws on, through empowering the peer educators, that there's also a positive effect of the programme. Moving from the theoretical to the empirical, again looking at peer education, I'm just going to mention one study as one of these meta-analysis where somebody takes the time to review the other pieces of research or evaluations on peer education. Here it's the Global Health Council. They had a look at what reports and evaluations there were on this method. They looked at 271, and many of which weren't good enough for them to use. But of the ones that they were able to use, and this is international, these were the findings for the method as a whole from a research basis. Basically, overall, that they found that peer educators are more effective than adult educators for delivering health promotion in young people, particularly in relation to HIV and sexual health. Interventions were found to be successful in improving attitudes and knowledge, and in increasing the practice of safe sex amongst high-risk young people. The most young people found peer-delivered health promotion more acceptable or relevant than other sources of information. And they're quite an important one, that the educators themselves reported benefits in terms of personal development from the intervention, and that they expressed a need for ongoing support and training. Okay, so I'm not going to say much more about that. There's loads and loads of literature. But just one concept that comes up time and time again when you're working with peer education. In English it's credibility. I think it's something like troverdighet, something like that, in Norwegian. Though, and I don't know in the Norwegian, in the English it's got an element of being a bit cool. If you're credible, you're a bit cool. And I'm not sure if you're troverdig, you're cool or not. But just to say that you often get kind of groups of young peer educators in Britain going around and like, yeah, it's good to be credible. And if you're credible, people listen to you. So just to get that across. Now, what does that mean? What's credible? What's a credible message? Because it's an important bit in the peer education. A credible or a believable message is culturally relevant. It's targeted, so it's aimed at whoever the education programme's for, and it's non-judgmental. This targeting is rather important, that the message that's given needs to be relevant to who receiving it. And I think that's been particularly the case again in Britain with this "just say no, all drugs are dangerous" message, that actually, while that may have an effect, the negative, if you like, information can have an effect on younger people who don't have experience of using drugs, that message is not credible for those that do have experience of using drugs, and they're more likely to respond to a message that is about how to minimise risks. So that's the credibility of the message and the targeting it to who you're talking to. And the messages that are non-judgmental and are based on fact rather than opinion are often seen as credible. So there we were, sitting in Bergensklinikkene, thinking, peer education. We'd looked at the literature. We were looking to develop something. As a competence centre, we serve our region and our community. We work with schools, we work with kommuner. And we were hearing very clearly that the schools wanted something, a package, ungdomsskole sort of age. And that's why we were looking at peer education as an option. So we went through the process of reading a lot of this literature, looking at the research, deciding what model or what package to use that already existed, whether to develop something new. Thinking a bit about peer education, these were some of the things we concluded. Advantages did include this credibility as a method, that peer educators often seen as less of a threat than adults going into a class, because we were thinking school for our particular model. That role modelling could be interesting, that it could have an impact. Peer education can be used as a method to reach more hidden groups of young people. It can be cost effective, and importantly it can be benefits for those that are used as educators, not just those that are educated. We developed a programme that's now come to be called To Do or Not to Do. Now, that's got nothing to do with me. that was the young people decided on the English title. As I said, we looked at the evidence base. So just explaining a bit the background to developing this. But we wanted to know, as a competence centre, about the young people in the ungdomsskole. What were their needs? If we were going to develop or find a package for them, we wanted to know what they wanted to know, what was interesting for them. So this was early on, this was back in, again, 2002. We had some focus groups with near a class of pupils. We had 9 focus groups where we talked with them. We did a small questionnaire. Our aim was to find out what they wanted to know and to try out a little bit different exercises and methods. We asked them, who would you like to receive drug education from? This is what they said to us. What was quite interesting is at the time we had been approached by some stars saying we'd like to work with young people and go into classes and do some drug education work. And we heard from the young people that they didn't actually want to get drug education from stars. They didn't see those, I would say, as a credible source of drug education. I'm sure they would have loved to have met these sports stars, but I'm not sure that they would have wanted their drug education from these sports stars, shall we say. Unsurprisingly, for those who work in the drugs field, the young people said they would like an ex-drug user, and also rather popular older young people. When we kind of discussed this, what came up was the credibility that the ex-drug user knows what they're talking about. They know about drugs. Older young people know what they're talking about. They know what it's like to be a young person. So that was interesting. We did a little exercise called Everything You've Always Wanted to Know But Never Dared Ask, where the young people could put on a blank, anonymous piece of paper questions that they had, that they've always wondered about. They could ask absolutely anything. It was completely confidential. And then we collected those together. And there wasn't anything very surprising at all, but it was an opportunity for them to be very honest about what they were wondering. They were wondering why young people use drugs. They were wondering about the effects of different drugs and what the risks were. And they were wondering, what are the signs? How can you tell if somebody's using? There were many other things, but those were the 3 key kind of group areas that they were wondering about, interested in, had questions. We used the information from these groups and we put together a package, a programme that could be used. It involved a number of key players. It involved identifying or recruiting some peer educators from a local videregående skole at Sandsli, with whom we had a good cooperation. It involved them helping us make links into 3 of the ungdomsskole that were feeder schools, who would in the end be on the recipients, the receivers of the education sessions. We also involved parents in the whole programme, who thought it would be important that they were at least knew what their children were experiencing at school. Later on, we thought it would be useful to bring in the Kommune in terms of what we actually have decided is into the trainers of the peer educators. It would be good to have one from the school, the videregående skole, and one from the local Kommune who has a bit of drugs experience or expertise. Could be Utkontakten, for example, or somebody with drug knowledge. So this is the model, pictorially, of what we've been doing. The fagfolk there, that's actually, in this case it's been us at the Competence Centre, training a teacher and maybe a communal worker, who in turn train. Now we called them ambassadors. That's the peer educators, a group of peer educators within the videregående skole, who in turn went out into 3 ungdomsskoler, into a class, and met with a class 4 times and delivered an education session. So we end up with lots of materials, but the main material here is the peer educators get a file. Now our peer educators helped develop that. We tried to get this participation as much as possible. They chose the name, they chose between exercises, there's options on what exercises. In addition, there's a workbook that goes to the Nina cluster where they fill in and do exercises. There's a trainer's file and a trainers, which is where we train them up. Our aim for this school's intervention, it was important that it was rather clear, was to improve young people's knowledge about risks in terms of use of drugs, to try and get rid of some of the myths and misunderstandings about drug use, and to work with young people in terms of their ability to master situations where drugs are present. Now, we didn't set ourselves the goal of reducing or stopping drug use amongst young people for this programme. We set ourselves educational goals rather than heavy drug prevention goals. So we went for intermediate goals, if you like. We did in the evaluation measure for behaviour change, but that wasn't in terms of drug use, it wasn't a goal. Here's the contents for the manual that we've developed, the to do or not to do manual, which all the peer educators have. It's got some overheads, it's got some exercises, it's got some explanations. They gave names, actually, so there was to think or not to think, to know or not to know, to do or not to do. Those were the key components. And it was very much about getting discussion between the videregående who were leading the sessions and the Niana class in a structured way through exercises and quite a lot of activity, trying to get some debate, discussion, and consideration. This is just as an example of one of the exercises. This was probably one of the most popular in terms of the feedback that the students liked, was one called Janai Kansha. And very simply, this involved a statement, and we start gentle and then move on to some of the more druggy statements. There's corners of the room, yes, no, maybe. And the class are asked to choose. Okay, it's easy to stop smoking if you want to. Those that think yes, go stand in the yeah corner. No, maybe. So everybody moves, goes into a different corner. And then they're asked to justify, why have you gone there? So this group had to explain why they think it is easy to stop smoking. That group had to say why they think it isn't. And the undecideds, the culture, have to sort of say what their considerations are. And then everyone's allowed to change after the discussion and go and say, again, discuss a bit why they've changed. Now actually, that's quite typical. It's a discussion exercise, a bit active. That's one from the evaluation that the students really liked. They liked the fact they were allowed opinions. There wasn't a right answer, and it was more about considering, thinking through why you've decided to say what you say. Practical bits. I kind of thought you might like to know a few practical bits, just from our experience of setting it up. Just in terms of timing, in terms of training up the peer educators, it was a negotiation, obviously, with the videregående skole, how they could fit the training within their timing, within the school year. But what we did was begin in January with the peer education training. I think we had about 6 double sessions, and we had a residential, an away weekend, which was very much about getting to know each other as a group. And then the peer educators in March, after the half term, went into the ungdomsskole and had 4 double sessions, or 1 single and 3 double sessions. So it was completed within that time period with about roughly one double session a week, but not every week. There was also we've run this twice now. We've had 2 pilots, if you like. The second time there was a valgfag at the videregående skole, which was focusing on drug prevention. So all of our peer educators had 8 to 10 weeks training on drugs, drug education, drug prevention. And this bit, the peer education, was a project. So it fit quite nicely as a project work within that. It also meant they were very experienced. They knew quite a bit about drugs by the time they started. Yeah, I did the first time when we developed the programme with a colleague from Sansley who was I think he's a rådgiver was the job, and a bit of some teaching. So we did it together. And the second time, again, it was one of us from the competence centre and somebody from the school. So yeah. Next time we're doing our third and final pilot, actually, with a bigger, wider group. We're training school and kommune leaders, and we're not going to go into the classroom. But up to now we have been. We've had between 12 and 14 peer educators in a group. We still, actually at the beginning, the first time round we had 20, and it was too many. So we cut it down the second year. The reason it was too many was because we do a lot of practice in that time. So each individual needs time to have a go, standing at the front of the class and leading an exercise and working an overhead and actually starting to do some group exercises. It is a fairly cheap method, so costs primarily come down to time, staff time, and photocopying of some of the resources. There's not other major. The residential, if you choose, or if people choose to take students away for a weekend, that's obviously more expensive. The first time we just had a Saturday. The second time we had a weekend away. And the Saturday involved buying pizza and using the competence centre room, so that wasn't too expensive either. Age, we had educators from all 3 years in videregående skole, actually. So mainly they were older, but it didn't seem to make a big difference in terms of their ability and performance. And this programme we developed with the focus groups for 9. klasse. Our peer educators were volunteers. Now that's often a thing in the literature, is whether that actually it's better to recruit and interview and be rather choosy about who your peer educators are. And I think that's particularly true in some of the community projects. Ours was actually open, though we were a little bit strict in terms of that those that joined the programme had to go through all of the training before they went into the ungdomsskole. There were 2 that missed enough training that we asked them not to go into the school. So we were rather strict on that level. As I say, the final level is we had 2 adults that train the peer educators. And what we decided at the end of 2 rounds is it might be best to have a school person. It could be 2 school people, or we could have a school and a kommune person who's got drugs knowledge and expertise from before. How are we doing time? Okay. Yeah, no, good question. Yeah, as a competence centre, Sean is one of our interests. So we did specifically, when we developed the programme, as you say, with the focus group, we had 3 boys groups, 3 girls groups and 3 mixed groups. Actually, we didn't find any differences in terms of the focus groups, the needs. We didn't find any clear enough differences to develop the programme for different groups. So the whole of the programme with the Nina class is in mixed class or mixed groups. What we did decide to do was focus a little bit on Sean as a topic throughout the programme, so get the young people themselves to discuss the differences and show some of the information we share shows a little bit different trends in consumption, or difference in, for example, that girls' bodies and boys' bodies are different in terms of alcohol, soaking up alcohol, that can have a different impact. So we looked at it as a theme rather than actually working in groups. But we were actually hoping to find a difference early on and then change the programme. We didn't, so we worked with what we found. We've run this programme twice now. The first year was developing it with the educators. The second year we had a nice package and we tried it out. Some of the educators in the second year had been with us the first year, so we had some experienced ones and some new ones. It was the same 3 schools, ungdomsskolen, both times. We tried to evaluate quite tightly, so we could, and we tried to be open so that we could actually say, yeah, this is working or not working. And also, what bits are working well, what can we improve? We did process evaluations throughout. We did a questionnaire with the pupils before the programme and after, and we did a questionnaire with the educators before and after. We also had a control group, which was a group of pupils from the same schools that didn't do the programme. So I'm just going to summarise for you. We haven't quite published the evaluation report, but you're getting an early look at our findings. It's sitting on my desk at the moment, waiting to go to the printers. What we found was that amongst the Nina cluster pupils, as a result of going through the peer education programme, that they did show some increase in knowledge in relation to health risks associated with alcohol use. They didn't show any particular or significant increase in knowledge on tobacco use. We tested just for certain things. They knew loads about risks of tobacco before. They actually had done projects on tobacco and smoking. There'd also been a national campaign on the dangers of smoking. So there were something like 90% correct answers before, which we couldn't really improve much on, or not significantly. But we did show a significant increase in knowledge of alcohol-related risks. We also showed an increase in knowledge on a whole wider range of risks and myths linked to alcohol and drug use. There were lots of, we did a quiz and we did lots of talking discussion, things like if you drink black coffee you sober up quick, you get drunk more through mixing drinks, boys and girls' bodies react in the same way to alcohol. So there were quite a lot of topics like that where they learnt from the programme, they increased their knowledge. This one was quite a big target for the programme. It's the Flertalsmissforståelse the idea that everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, whether it's drugs or sex, and that makes you more likely to have a go yourself. So we did try and target this, trying to give accurate and correct information about levels of drug use amongst your friends and your peers, which is invariably lower than you expect. I'm not going to give you very many tables, just show a couple. We have the data on levels for, as I said, from the ungdomsundersøkelse of 8. and 10. klasse. So we have facts. And we asked these students, if you're thinking about year 8 pupils, how many do you think have ever used hash? Do you think in a class, so it's in a class, how many do you think have used hash? 1 or less, 2 to 3, 5 to 6, 10 to 20. And that's the results from the questionnaire before the programme. And the correct answer is 1 or less, and the questionnaire after. So we did manage to move, if you like, the estimate in the right direction. So they were lowering their estimate. How many do you think in a class of year 8 have ever been drunk? And we again, I've highlighted ones that perhaps show a big change. So we've got them to reduce their estimate there, which was rather high, just under half, thought between 10 and 20. Afterwards, it was lower. And finally, smoking. How many smoke every day? What's your estimate? And again, the lower level increased. So there was a significant change in terms of this flertalsmisforståelse, as we call it. We measured for current drug use or intention to use drugs in the future. And we got no significant change for that, which is what we expected. Though it would be interesting to do a follow-up to see after a year if there was any difference in terms of drug use between the control and the programme. We asked them about, did they think they'd learnt what they thought they'd learnt and how they felt in terms of their ability to handle drug-related situations. What benefits did the ungdomsskole pupils see? And we got self-reported high levels of benefits from the programme. So very high levels agreed they'd got increased their knowledge. I think the one we were reading, we had one here about, as you mentioned, about gender, because we'd focused quite a bit. Did they feel they were more aware of the differences between boys and girls' drug use? Were they more like, we also worked quite hard in the programme on the media as a source of not very good information often. So we asked them if they were more likely to trust the media after. So there was one question turned around. The one we were pleased with was that they felt more confident in handling situations where drugs were offered. We don't know what they will do, but it was good that they felt, or reported feeling more confident. And there were high levels of satisfaction, which is, again, quite to be expected. So in terms of satisfaction with the actual peer educators and satisfaction, those that said they would recommend such a programme to other leerlingenklassen, other young people. These are just a couple of the comments. There was an open space. We asked on the questionnaire, what did you really like? What didn't you like? What would you like more of, less of? It was an opportunity for the young people to they liked a lot of the exercises. There was 1 or 2 exercises we kicked out because they didn't like them. They liked the facts, a lot of the facts on drugs and risks. we extended that. So we took into account a lot of this feedback to improve the programme, actually. So we're still in our third pilot now. And it was nice to give the feedback to the peer educators so they could hear, because they didn't get to know until afterwards what the inner class thought. We did a questionnaire with the peer educators themselves. Now, small group, nothing can be significant in a group of 12, 14. Most of them had done it before. They'd done it the previous, or half of them had done it before, so we couldn't really find very much change. They'd also done the Valgfag, so they were quite knowledgeable. But we still checked. We still looked to see if we could make any increases in areas. There was little change in the educators' knowledge. That was really high, 90% at the start. But we did actually get a slight improvement on the Flertalsmisforståelse, even for the peer educators. They started a little bit too high at the beginning, and by the end they had a more realistic understanding. We had an increase in their levels of self-confidence, which again, some of them were experienced, so it was high at the start. The one area that they didn't increase, they showed a small decrease, was class control, which I'll come back to. And they were overall very satisfied with the programme. So these were some of the tasks that we tried to train them up in practically, and then we asked how confident they felt both before and after the programme. And some of our, as I say, was generally very, very high for almost everything after the programme, with the exception of controlling the class. And some of we decided with the peer educators not to have an adult with them in the classroom. Now, some of them managed that fine, but others did struggle in terms of maintaining order. And it's one of the things that we've taken forward into the next training, is actually the discussing the option of taking a teacher back into the class. Now, the educators were rather strong, they didn't want that, so it may be a compromise. We're still learning, still flexible. It may be that the teacher is available, more readily available. But I think that's an important one, because what we don't want to do is lose their confidence in terms of holding class control. Just to summarise then, our evaluation showed what we expected to find. Having looked at the literature, we found that with our programme we were able to show a significant knowledge gain, again in information around drug risks, drug facts. We heard from the pupils through the qualitative information that they liked the fact that it was older young people that were giving them the information. They thought that was credible. We did show an increase in self-confidence almost across the board, self-reported, and there was a high level of satisfaction. In our report we make lots of recommendations which are for others that want to have a go and for us to improve. It seemed really useful to integrate the training into the Valgfag, so if there's any way that a peer education model can sit within a larger education around drugs or module, then that was very positive. One of the things that we're also interested in the training is talking to our peer educators about discussing their own life experiences in the class. We know that some of our educators have got their own experiences of drug use, because we've asked and know from the questionnaire. And we took that as positive, as long as that was held within the context of the peer education training. We know from the pupils' questionnaires that some of our peer educators did share their own life experiences, their own thoughts, which is what we expected. And the pupils put that down as the positives if you like. What did you really like? Then they said, really like some of the stories and the experiences from the peer educators. Now what's interesting is when we developed the programme, we hadn't put a place for that in. So they've obviously found ways themselves of sharing and answering questions and discussing. And it obviously worked really well. But we need to look at how that's done. I think one of our recommendations is in the training is to discuss more overtly with the peer educators the sharing and the way they share. And it obviously worked, but I think we need to do it, just have it in a context and as part of a discussion. We didn't get many parents turning up, so we need to look at how to perhaps be a bit more inspiring to the parents that we try to involve and to inform about the programme. We, the first time, the adults made the links with the ungdomsskole, between the videregående ungdomsskole, etc., and it worked okay. We actually thought, okay, maybe the peer educators could do it and talk to teachers, and the second time didn't work so well. So I think that's we've learned organisational and planning is probably best left in the hands of the trainers, the school staff or the communal staff. I've discussed with you the idea of one of our learning is this adult support in the classroom, that we don't want to disempower our peer educators in any way. So that's one thing we're taking up and discussing with them a little bit more carefully with the schools. And the evaluation's been really interesting, and what we would like to do is have a year follow-up to see if any of the changes we found last or if they're just short term. So the increase in knowledge, the improvement in the flertalsmisforståelse, the increase in self-confidence, are they kind of end of programme high, or will they still be there after a year? Just to finish, one of my other interests is futures, scenario planning, futures thinking. And this comes from a Danish report that was reviewing peer education in Denmark and in Scandinavia as a whole. And what was quite nice, just a thought to leave you on, is how, as a model, peer education is quite well suited to kind of present society and the kind of young people that are relatively empowered. I'm not going to read it out, I'm going to leave you to just have a look through.